Good afternoon. It being the 29th of March, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, call to order our Finance Committee meeting. Public comment? Seeing none. Any announcements that we have beyond the fact that this is being recorded on video as well as audio? We have minutes that were sent to us for the March 6th and March 7th meetings that we held. Is there a motion to approve? People have enough time to look at them.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So we're going to talk about. Do you want us to just do the planning stuff right now, the technical amendments? Or do you guys want to hear the whole song and dance this afternoon?
We just wanted to make you aware that, we haven't had the public hearing yet. Public hearing is scheduled for Friday, but to let you know that there's going to be a technical amendment probably pretty close to what we gave you. So,
Okay.
Just so you're aware, it's...
Could you just walk us through the practical implications,
Sure.
Please? We just began, for those of you that are just arriving, so we've not assigned you any additional tasks or responsibilities during your absence.
Okay. So, the changes are outlined in red.
This is 51, Andrew?
This is Article 75.
Okay. Yep.
So, the changes from the article that appears... start in section 2. So the first change is the breezeway. And you can see that the language that's being deleted there is this setting a minimum 10 feet between a house and a secondary dwelling. That's really a design issue. We can't really see why that's an important factor here. So that's an issue that's normally dealt with by the HTC in their review. Okay. Deck is a term that's used in the bylaw that has no definition, so we think it's important that it be in there to prevent or encourage sort of a standard understanding of what it means. Otherwise, it has to be interpreted. So, better to have a definition. Ground cover is an issue. The next one, where generally ground cover issues are where you have, again, this is important for interpretations, where you have unenclosed space under overhangs don't count for ground cover because it's open to the air. So there are times when a building design has a substantial overhang, but again, that's not affecting the coverage on the ground. That area is generally exempt. So again, and that's been an interpretation. We just want to be consistent and include that in the definition. Storage container, again, a term used in the bylaw that really needs a definition. And street, the definition, there's a term that was included which talks about a street which had on January 26, 1992 sufficient widths and grades. But there's a couple streets that actually no longer exist anymore. So they may have had sufficient widths and grades in 1992, but they don't now. So they shouldn't count for frontage. See what I'm saying?
Yep.
So the point is the conditions can change on that street, and the street, in order to qualify, has to have sufficient widths and grades. Structure, again in red, the intent of this was to exempt where there's a pair of stairs that don't extend more than 3 feet. So where you might have, again, unenclosed stairs in front of a building from that front yard setback, or a platform with side stairs, like many of the old houses in the old historic district. Too many times they're required to come in and have a variance when it's really not necessary. So this is what that change does. And again, unenclosed porch is consistent with open porches do not count for ground cover. And then again, this is just putting a definition for what that is. So that covers the definitions. And then if you go on to section 6, this again is that issue of the steps. So again, it's no more than 3 feet. So this is the platform that you typically have, and that's required by the building code with no more than 4 steps, and it can't have space underneath it. So for, again, the simple steps that go up to a house or go up to a porch, as long as it's not covered, those can be exempt from the setback. And that was the intent all along. So.
Okay.
So that covers that particular article. The other article would be to delete 1, and Leslie, which one is that, 51? So we're having discussions with that property owner right now. So it's a question of whether or not to remove that particular property from the article, to give them time to finish whatever they think they want to do. And again, I'm not sure that we're going to propose that, but just to let you know, it's something that we're going to discuss. I think it's pretty minor in terms of what you've already considered.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep, thank you. Any comments or questions? Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Welcome to John and to Libby and to Julia. Do you all have anything beyond what's on the agenda that you want to make sure that we cover this afternoon? Tom, do you?
One thing is a possible, the article be called by a citizen as Article 10, which is the Capital Program Committee article.
Let's get to that in a minute. The sidewalk one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else beyond?
Article 13, there's a technical amendment. When we were looking through everything this morning, the total actually, or Article 12, I'm sorry, the total was actually incorrect. So we proposed a technical amendment for your review to correct the total to the number without the, as was reflected in the warrant, without the water company additional money in there.
So it doesn't affect.
It does not affect anything other than
the total number.
It affects the total number. It should have been 14.8. It was 13.6, I think it was, when we went through it this morning.
Okay.
We noticed that it does not change any of the structure of the article, other than just the total for all enterprise funds. So,
okay.
And I don't think there's none other that I have.
Okay. Let's talk about Article 37, which is the CPC article. That article is going to get, as I understand it, the Board of Selectmen voted unanimously to call the article and voted unanimously to support the introduction of the $250,600 for the Academy Hill window replacement for the benefit of Hall-Keene Management, which is the management company. So it's going to, the article is going to be called, and they're, depending on what we decide here, may ensue or not ensue a discussion. In an attempt to not give the newspaper fodder for the fights that really don't occur between the selectmen and the finance committee, but nevertheless make for good reading in the windy days of March. I have spoken both with the chairman of the selectmen, Jim Kelly, Bob DaCosta briefly, and I've also spoken with Libby. And what I transmitted to them as a concern that I had, and I think that we had as a board, in addition to the fact that they are a private entity, although there is no prohibition for CPC money being used for a private entity. I think I have that correct. Is that the case, John? Was if because their lease requires them to do maintenance and capital improvements, and it would appear that that's really not been what they've been doing over the past few years. I was looking for some assurance, both from the town as well as from Hall Keene, that when they go through their refinance with Mass Housing Finance Authority, which they have either completed or in the process of doing, that they make sure that and I think that refinance is in the order of $2.2 or $2.3 million, whatever. Anyway, it's north of $2 million. That a substantial portion of that money be dedicated for capital improvements, that it not go to pay limited partners who might be involved in the investment, et cetera, et cetera. And in seeking that, I asked for a letter from the town manager, as well as a written commitment from Hall Keene that, in fact, they would spend, in this case, $1.7 million of the proceeds on the refinance, and that, as the town manager indicated, and I have the letters here I'll pass out a second, that the $250,000 is also an important part of the program. So let me pass out to you all the letters. And Terry, I'd like to make sure these get into the record. So this is Libby's letter to me, as well as an email from, and here, pass that to Terry, as well as an email from the president of Hall Keene on making use of the funds to actually do the improvements. So I know there were other issues associated with that lease. I'm not sure that I think they're more selectmen issues than they are finance committee issues about whether this is the appropriate entity to continue to lease the facility. But I think that's a policy decision, and it's clearly, in my view, clearly in the purview of the selectmen. So what I would like for discussion and for us to consider is that with this assurance from the town that we are comfortable that the $250,000 will be appropriately spent, and that Hall Keene is in this in the program, and they're putting their own money into the deal. So anyway, so let's have a discussion.
Well, I'm not sure. I appreciate everything you've done and said, David, but I'm still not sure I understand exactly why, if they have a lease that says they're responsible for capital improvements, public funds are being used to. And I'm not saying I'm necessarily even opposed to it. I'm just sort of confused as to if they're responsible for maintaining the property and doing capital improvements, why is the town / the CPC
contributing towards the capital repairs of the building? I mean, I thought that was sort of our, as a FinCom, I thought that was our issue here.
Correct. Yep.
What is the recourse, if any, if they don't do this? So we have these letters. What happens if it doesn't go this way?
Well, I mean, go ahead.
Just quick.
This is more of as an anecdote. I happened to run into Ken Beaugrand yesterday, and he's clearly supportive of this, and the CPC feels this is an appropriate use of the funds, and so.
We have no recourse.
The town doesn't either.
Well, other than the fact that we have, and part of the reason that I sought this letter from the town manager was, I would like the town to be on record as, and the
Right.
organization, the company, to be on record. They're going to spend the money on this. I mean, I have a real problem if they will not commit to the 1.7 or whatever the reasonable number is out of their refinance. Then I personally don't think that the town should put any money into this.
But the reality is we won't really know, will we?
That's totally up to us. I mean, I'm more than happy to hold the town manager's feet to the fire on this issue and get her to report on the expenditure. I would assume that the town would know that in some way, shape, or form. In addition, if you drive by there, you'll probably see the scaffolding.
Right. Just as a question about precedent, has the CPC given grants like this to other sort of private sector businesses?
Well, you have to, sure, there have been plenty of, quote, private entities, but they've all been not-for-profits. So churches,
Right.
HDC. Go ahead, John. Our CPC has done that. I don't.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted, for the benefit of the Finance Committee, that you understand, yes, this is a for-profit entity, which is unusual. But when I was talking to Ken a little bit earlier today, he indicated, and I'm just verifying it, that the town does hold a restriction. So there are requirements in the lease that they provide a certain level of affordability. So that would be, in my opinion, the valid public purpose for providing a grant. And there would, of course, be a grant agreement that would be negotiated and executed, requiring that the funds be spent in a particular manner. I'm not sure if that helps your deliberations, but I wanted you to know that.
Thank you. There are 12 of the 27 units are affordable. The other 15 are market rate, just so.
And initially, the number was, I think, 6, and it's gone up to 12 through subsequent negotiations that the operators had with Mass Housing when they've defaulted on their loan several times and needed more money for whatever reason. Part of their refinances required that they make more units restricted.
They gave up more units.
Part of this discussion, and something we didn't talk about, haven't mentioned yet today, is that we need to, in order for this refinance to happen, we need to extend the lease a significant number of years. What is that number again? It's at least 20?
40.
No, it's at least 20 beyond the initial term, but it will be, I think, more than 40 years.
The term of the loan is 40 years, so whatever.
Well, it's whatever the term is plus
Plus what's
10 or
left
20 or something. No, it's the term of the loan plus 10 or 20. I mean, the point is we're not getting this building back
Anytime soon.
ever.
Ever.
Because, if this is how negotiations happen, hey, we ran out of money and we need more money, extend our lease for $1 a year, we're never getting the building back. I don't think that was the intent 30 some odd years ago when we gave the building for $75 for 75 years. It was, you fix up the building, you deserve all the profit for managing it during the years, and then we'll get it back. That's not what we're seeing.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, so at the October special town meeting last year, town meeting authorized an extension of the lease for an additional 20-year term. And with that extension, the lease will now terminate on March 26, 2076. That has not been signed yet, but that has been authorized by town meeting.
So we've got this little circular negotiation going on here.
So it seems the justification for using CPC funds for this private enterprise is that the public purpose of having these affordable units is being served. Elsewhere in the CPC's recommendations, we have $500,000 going to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, $400,000. Thank you. 400. this seems like an awful lot of money for housing units that already exist. And as I understand it, John, can continue to exist. The town has ways of, if this operator were to default on their obligations and it went into receivership and we found a new operator, it's entirely possible and likely that the town could force these affordability restrictions to remain in place on the property. So we're not talking about a situation where we're likely to lose these affordable units, but we're spending $250,000 to preserve them. That's the public purpose that's being served for a for-profit enterprise. I just think, we need to be honest with ourselves about what's going on. There's a lot of for-profit businesses that operate buildings downtown that could use some maintenance.
Yeah, but I think, the reality is we're talking about, right here for subsidized housing to be privately, if the RFP isn't out, it's going out shortly, to be privately owned and operated with a subsidy from the town in the form of a gift of land or whatever. So, our precedent for providing funds in one form or another to private operators for part of our housing is there. To me, I don't. That's,
the
we
precedent
can argue
is
about whether $20,000 a unit, which is about what it works out to with CPC money, is reasonable or not. But
I think the precedent is that we gave essentially free land in a building and said, you fix it up. That's similar to what we're talking about here with the RFP. You have the land, you build, and then you maintain. This action would be precedent for that operator 20 years from now saying, we've got a bunch of roofs that need replacing. Why don't you pony up?
But
that's a different thing.
You and I both seen the pro formas. These guys are, and John, I'd appreciate your thought on this. They're in default on a $6 million second note, and they propose it to be negatively amortized over the next 30 years. So at the end of this, they're going to owe on the second subordinated note $14 million. They're not paying that note down, and that's from Mass Housing Finance, and they're taking another note on, which in my review of their financials, they can probably support out of cash flow. But, the dilemma I think that the selectmen have is that you've got an asset that in the town...
Needs new windows.
Pardon me?
That needs new windows.
Yeah, but also may come bouncing back unless Mass Housing writes off the note. That's the dilemma that I think we have. There is no way these guys can ever generate enough cash flow to support the debt that's currently on the facility and the debt that they propose to put on. It's just not feasible unless they get equity investors to put and cover the note, which the equity investors aren't going to do because they're not going to get a return.
So what's the motivation for Mass Housing to refinance?
I don't know enough about Mass Housing to do it other than support affordable housing.
So what you're saying then is, as an operator, Halkeen may or may not make it around until 2076, and we may get the building back sooner.
That is a conclusion one could draw looking at the financials.
Maybe we should maintain our building.
It's not just a conclusion that one could draw. It's a conclusion that two auditors drew, right? Over the last 6 years, there have been two audit reports that we've been made aware of, and they both question the
financial viability.
Right. So we have an operator that hasn't performed well in the past and has a bleak outlook for the future, and we're entering into a situation where we're going to extend their lease for essentially 60 years from today, and we're going to prop them up by paying their bills for their obligations under the lease. Under what circumstances does that make sense? Is it because we got bigger fish to fry elsewhere? I haven't heard a good reason why this needs to happen.
Libby, would you know whether the CPC funds are a condition on the loan or just $250,000 that they don't otherwise have to borrow?
My information says that when Mass Housing was considering the refinance, they were taking into account the possible grant from CPC in the amount of $250,000 for the repair of some of the windows in the building. Without the receipt of these funds, they may not have sufficient funds to do all of the repairs they deem necessary.
And John, what legally can they be compelled to do? Or to, what performance can they be held to on?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that's going to be an issue for that the Board of Selectmen will be considering when they actually negotiate the lease extension. I know that the board has been very concerned about making sure that this remains a viable project, that the building is kept up, so that when it is returned to the town in 2076, it's going to be in decent shape. We have told Mass Housing that the selectmen are willing to consider an extension of the lease. Town meeting has authorized it, but any lease extension is going to be subject to terms and conditions required by the Board of Selectmen to ensure that that asset remains viable and up to date.
But has Mass Housing indicated that this $250,000 is a necessary precondition for
my understanding is
their extending the loan?
Sorry. My understanding, Mr. Chairman, is that the $250,000 is part of the pro forma that has been submitted to Mass Housing. So Mass Housing's numbers and approvals have been based upon that assumption. If the money were withdrawn, would Mass Housing withdraw the financing for the project? I can't say that to be the case. I have not seen that representation from Mass Housing. But I think Mass Housing is assuming, for basis of the pro forma, that that money will be available.
And can if town meeting were to approve the add back on the CPC, does the $250,000 leave the purview of I'm formulating this as I go, so please excuse the lack of articulateness. Basically, what I'm trying to understand is, can the selectmen withhold the payment of the $250,000, and I understand they have to do the work first, until such time as that lease extension has been negotiated? Or once town meeting votes the money, does it leave the control of the town?
It does not, because as with any CPA appropriation, it's subject to a grant agreement that has to be negotiated and approved by the Board of Selectmen. So the Board of Selectmen, this is just an appropriation of money. It's an authorization to spend. There's no requirement that the funds be spent. And unless and until there is a grant agreement in place signed by the town manager, I believe, actually signs the grant agreements under CPA. But that grant agreement will specify the terms and conditions by which that money will be released to the tenant. And so it is, I don't know what the selectmen would do in that case, but it certainly would be possible, in my opinion, not to approve that grant agreement until a lease is negotiated, a lease extension.
Okay, so you from a statutory and legal perspective, assuming the selectmen went in that direction, that they're on firm ground for doing that?
Absolutely.
So what do you guys want to do? I can tell you that this is a complex discussion for town meeting floor. So if we can get it distilled to something that everybody can understand.
The town leased property, the lessor is not performing on their obligations. That seems pretty clear to me. We're extending our relationship with an entity that has a bad track record, and essentially what assurance we have is that we may, in the extension of the lease, require that they maintain the building and return it in good condition. That's already in the lease. It's in the current lease. As a member of the Finance Committee, that proposed arrangement doesn't leave me satisfied that the town is in a better position vis-a-vis this property or the operator going forward.
Jean?
If we simplify this right back to where I think the CPC started with this, we have a historic building that the town of Nantucket owns. Yes, we have a lease agreement out there, but I believe in part the intent of the CPC was to preserve an historic building that just happens to have affordable housing in it. I absolutely concur with our earlier decision, but now I think we've got into a very difficult leverage situation. So I, for one, am more comfortable going back to having some assurances from the town on how they release this money to this entity, and I'm sort of comfortable there.
John?
Mr. Chairman, so this project was approved by the CPC as a community housing project, although it does potentially certainly qualify under the historic preservation program. In fact, the money's being appropriated from the community housing program.
Yep.
I thought the case was laid out very well here when we voted originally, and I thought I agreed with them, I agree with them now, and I haven't heard anything to change my opinion.
Peter?
I feel the same. What's Chris say?
I do too.
I just wonder if this is a case of being dead right, though. Clearly the Board of Selectmen voted to appropriate the funds and felt that the property was, and the town's interest in the property was worth investing in, protecting. I don't particularly like it. I think getting back to Steve, I think started sort of made the argument is correct, but it's a case of being dead right. You want to stand on principle, and then I don't know. It seems to me that we might want to consider it's money well spent on an asset that we own, and hold our nose a little bit.
But an asset that we own, but we won't benefit from for another 60 years.
Well, it sure sounds to me like we may be getting it back sooner than that, but maybe.
Any more discussion? Anybody want to offer a motion on where we go from here?
Is it appropriate to ask either the Board of Selectmen on why they voted unanimously?
You can ask them. They may or may not answer, but our chairman is here.
What was the question?
The question was, and I think I was at the actual Board of Selectmen meeting where you brought this up, and it was voted unanimously to proceed and to reallocate the money to Hal Keane through the CPC funds, and wanted a reason where you were collectively coming from, why you approved it.
We got three answers coming here.
So the board considered this. There was a little work group that Libby formed to help the board get some more information about how to proceed with this renegotiation, this lease. The board approved the lease negotiations as John's outlined, and I personally felt that restoring these funds was an important part of, I guess, the transaction. I will personally make sure that we use our best efforts to make sure that the 1.7 million is we get that money invested in the in that facility. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's. Did we actually see contracts or agreements with Hal Keane with the
bidders in the project? Do we see those numbers? Did they sign a contract already? I mean, I hear there's scaffolding, but it seems a little presumptuous.
No, there's not scaffolding. No. I'm just saying that's.
Are you talking about with Mass Housing?
Between Mass Housing and Halkeen.
So my latest
information.
My latest information is that the project has not actually been formally approved by Mass Housing, although I think it's scheduled to be shortly. One of the things that Mass Housing wanted to see before bringing the project to the board to approve, they wanted to see a letter from the Board of Selectmen indicating an intent to negotiate a lease extension. That letter has been provided, and I do not believe, although I could be wrong on this, I do not believe that Mass Housing has formally met to approve the project yet. And so I suspect that one of the things Mass Housing will be looking at is what happens to this $250,000 appropriation, which, as I indicated earlier, is part of the so-called pro forma that Mass Housing has been looking at in order to fund this project.
Rick?
Has to bring it down from Mr. Kelly's level. Maybe just a little, a different take, but an extended take. The board had in executive session discussions about the terms that we might agree to in order to extend our lease. I'm not sure at this point that the town's ability to exercise typical loan agreement covenants in the same way you would expect Mass Housing to have loan agreement covenants. I don't know that we're going to be able to rely on those yet. I won't be on the board when that kind of technical discussion comes up, but thus far I don't feel I have assurances that the concerns we might have to make sure what happened previously can't happen again will be incorporated to our benefit in addition to Mass Housing. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but so I think you need to work with the Board of Selectmen, if that's what you wish to have happen, to make sure in some way that does happen.
Thank you. Don, did you want to comment?
I agree with what's been said by both other board members, but just in regard to the CPC end of it, there was extensive discussion about this at the CPC level, and it was definitely a project that crossed both affordable housing and historic preservation, but it fell into the affordable housing category as far as the appropriation. But CPC does not release those funds until the work has been satisfactorily completed. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone is clear on that end of it. I think that you are. But all of this was discussed in a similar way to what you've discussed and in further detail. So I just, and as far as the overall CPC package, taking this money out just leaves it sitting there put to no use for this whole year. And overall, I think that it's only going to benefit the people who are currently residing in the building and the overall long-term health of the building. Aside from the CPC, I think that the Board of Selectmen is going to be very careful on how it proceeds with everything in regard to their agreements with Halkeen.
Great, thank you. Stephen, you look like you want to say something. So, Chairman Kelly is giving his personal assurance. Mr. Atherton is not sure what can ultimately, well, certainly the town doesn't have the same covenant rights as Mass Housing does. Don, thanks on the, we know that the CPC money gets approved after they've spent it. I think we're back at that issue of, what kind of commitments are going to come out of Hall Keene. How enforceable are they? And we have some timing issues because we're clearly going to either approve or not approve the CPC money. Ahead of concluding the negotiations and seeing the selectmen concluding negotiations and seeing the covenant terms with Mass Housing. So I don't suppose anybody since I assume, Jim, that you all will be the ones with the motion to restore the money. Is there any consideration that you all would give to not coming forth with that motion and getting this lease negotiated? So I think that the issue that
That's a Board of Selectmen decision, and I can tell you that I think the motion to put it back, the money back, was unanimous. If that's any indicator.
Okay. My sense is that from the Finance Committee that there's probably not enough votes to change how we approach it.
Disappointed, because, my goal was to...
Could you?
My hope was that we would avoid a town meeting, on the floor of town meeting, this, I guess, conflict, but the board felt pretty strongly about it, and I think just my own due diligence and talking to the folks that are negotiating with Mass Housing and Hall Keene, I'm comfortable with the board's action, and we'll pursue that if there's no other accommodation coming from the Finance Committee.
Okay.
So we either modify our motion or leave it as is, and it's going to get called. It's going to get called.
It's going to get called. So if we do nothing, we'll stand up and make our position and rationale known, and as I'm sure the selectmen and others will do, and town meeting will vote on it. So, yes.
Just to offer a suggestion for you, one resolution you might consider would say something like, we would support the board's motion to put the money back in the article, and we would request that we have an opportunity to review the final lease terms, which have not yet been agreed to by the Board of Selectmen, before the funds are dispersed or something like that. That's really the board's position without saying it right now, because they have no agreement on the lease extension. So something like that might sort of bridge the gap.
But, David, as I understand it, the refinancing with Mass Housing is predicated on a lease extension with the board, right? So explain to me the order of all these things.
Well, I think of it, Steve, as like a simultaneous closing. I don't think either side is going to sign off on the dotted line, including the borrower, to all the terms and conditions without the other agreeing to it. So you're going to know the town's expectations, you're going to know Mass Housing's, and you're going to know the borrower's expectations. Otherwise, John can comment on this, but it would be extremely unlikely that a closing would ever take place without that understanding.
And just to reiterate, it's at the discretion of the Board of Selectmen through the town manager about whether those CPC funds are released, if they're approved. So what happens if Hall Keene goes up, the money's approved, the lease extension isn't done, Hall Keene goes up and starts repairing the windows, finishes the work and presents the town with a bill for $250,000. And there's no lease extension, there's no agreement with Mass Housing.
Mr. Chairman, so the authority, the town meeting is only authorizing the expenditure. It does not mandate the expenditure. So, and it is subject to a grant agreement. So I would expect that all of the questions you just asked would be spelled out in the grant agreement that is yet to be negotiated. It is possible that, and I don't know this to be a fact, but it's possible the selectmen may say, we are not going to sign that grant agreement. The signing of that grant agreement will be part of the comprehensive closing on both the lease extension and the refinancing. To me, that sounds like that would be the way to go here. But nothing gets released. There's no obligation to release the money until a grant agreement is actually executed.
Great, thank you. Any more discussion?
I just have
Yeah.
one more question. What's the downside of waiting a year and revisiting this next year?
We have an operator who claims not to have the money to repair the building they're obligated to repair. So I guess the downside would be that they're being truthful and that the building will continue to deteriorate.
But in terms of our commitment of the $250,000, if we say we would like to revisit this next year after the lease has been negotiated and the mass housing refinancing has happened, is someone coming forward and saying the windows are leaking, it's a desperate situation?
I know that they don't open properly. There are significant issues with the windows, and under better circumstances, with a more responsible operator, they would have been repaired already.
Don?
The downside to me is that there are people living in this building, and the CPC cannot encumber those funds already for next year. They'll have a whole new set of applications that go through an extensive 3-month review process to decide how to allocate those funds. Right now, that money has been made available. It can't go to anything else. It's just going to sit there for a year. And I suppose the worst case scenario is that we end up with a building back in our hands that has repaired windows. And it benefits the people who live there. So that's, I think, why the CPC really went this direction.
Jim?
The other potential outcome is, we've talked about this tripartite agreement. So Mass Housing is making some assumptions about the $1.7 million being used to make improvements, and also the CPC money. We don't know, because we haven't been able to determine if that's a deal killer or not, but certainly, as we've heard, that they've made that assumption that money's going to be available, as they've contemplated giving this loan that has certain requirements for improvements.
All right, do we need to work this anymore? Somebody want to formulate a motion?
Well, I mean, I move to, however it be worded, but, restore the $250,600 to the CPC article number 37, kind of reversing or modifying our previous decision.
With any conditions or just straight?
No, I would not add any conditions. I think I want to leave the town the flexibility to cut the deal they want to cut.
Is there a second on that?
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion on that? Nobody has a better way to do it? They want to proffer? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So, all right, so now we go back to, we need another motion.
So we have it.
Yeah.
Do we have one? I guess we can just leave it.
Yeah, we don't need to take any
We
action.
reversed it earlier.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the discussion. So I guess the outcome of this will be, you guys will, the Board of Selectmen will make their motion to restore the funds. We will probably have something to say about it based upon our current motion, and then it'll get voted on. So, okay. We have a technical. I don't even want to call it a technical amendment. We have a late breaking we would like another $100,000 request.
There's a request to add $100,000 to the capital article number 10 for sidewalk improvements on Five Corners and Pleasant Street. We've found that there is something, actually a feasibility study, et cetera, in for fiscal 19. This request was not brought before the Capcom. It was not in their Capcom report. What I have seen proposes to use $100,000 from free cash, which there is not $100,000 in free cash to be appropriated to this. So the proponent would have to identify another funding source, of which I don't know that we even have the additional levy capacity right this second to be able to do it as well. So I'm not entirely sure what the funding source would look like.
Okay.
Just to make you aware.
So, fire away on the questions. I mean, the email traffic indicates that the Capcom reviewed it, which I've checked with our representative. The Capcom did not review this request. The proponent also, or it's indicated that the Finance Committee approved it and the Board of Selectmen approved it. So, we've not approved it. I can't speak for the Board of Selectmen, but I don't think
it's not gone before anybody. It was actually in initial discussions when we were working on finalizing the fiscal 18 plan. Anything to do with the sidewalk it is in the capital plan for fiscal 19, and that's where it has resided since the original 18 plan was put forward back in late September, early October.
This is a proposal by the town, or
it's a proposal by two private citizens who approached the transportation planner when they noticed that it wasn't in, and were advised to call the article and do an amendment, and they were offered the solution of free cash, which nobody actually approached me to discuss whether we had $100,000 in free cash to allocate towards it.
Is there, John? Is there an ability to on an article such as this, where they've got discrete line items, to just add on a citizen's basis money? I'm sure you're going to tell me yes, it is possible. But
well, Mr. Chairman, that of course is ultimately a question for our esteemed moderator. But I would point out that when you do your warrant articles, you don't identify the projects in the warrant articles. So it's not like adding another one is beyond the scope of what was printed in the warrant, because it's just a general warning to the voters that capital projects will be included in the motion that comes before town meeting.
Well, except on this case, we do identify all the capital items.
You're looking at the motion, I believe, are you not?
I'm looking at the article, and it's got other capital items listed here.
Yeah.
Motion.
The motion just starts right
okay.
at that.
So, esteemed moderator, is there a comment on your part or on this?
I've already told them that given the way it's written in the warrant, that it's within the scope.
Okay. It's been the policy recently of the Finance Committee not to take items like this up this close to town meeting, so I'm not proposing that we take it up. I think this is your opportunity to make sure you understand the article. We will, if it gets called and somebody else doesn't explain that it never made it to any of these bodies, I certainly will do that. But, so, everybody, any questions? Okay. Do we have any more technical amendments? You're going to give us, do you think you're going to have any on Saturday morning that are absolutely minor? I saw your email. You said you didn't have any from administration. Brian, you don't? Other than what we have. Okay. 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 Great. Any more discussion? Things? So we start at 9 o'clock, but if everybody could sort of try to get there around 8:30 in the event that we have to conduct some very last-minute technical amendment business. That would be great.
Okay.
Otherwise, a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Thank you. Okay. Madam Moderator, this is your stage now.
Thank you.